wala. Dear brothers and sisters, respected guests, guests from the various embassies, Muslim leaders, interfaith leaders, and our friends from the community, thank you all for joining us this evening. You've braved the cold to come here, and with the announcement of more COVID restrictions starting from tomorrow, you've still managed to come here, so really you should pat yourself on the back for being here. And for the mosque, on behalf of the East London Mosque and London Muslim Centre, this is really our third public program in a physical sense. Previously, for the last 2 years, we've had a marathon number of events online through Zoom, Teams, and others. But this evening's event is organized at quite a short notice because of the important and serious developments taking place in Bosnia. Some of you may be asking, why the topic? Bosnia under attack again. You may be saying, why are we being alarmists? Are we trying to scaremonger people? To talk more about this and really to give you the facts on the ground, we have an esteemed lineup of guests today, especially His Excellency, the Ambassador of Bosnia, and also Peter O'Born and Zara Mohammed from the Muslim Council of Britain, who will be giving us a recorded message. But before we proceed, I'd like to now present to you a sheikh from Bosnia, Sheikh Ferru Mestur. He's from Bosnian origin, and he is the Imam at the Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul, in Turkey. This recording of recitation of the Quran was specially prepared for us in July. So we will play this video for you now, the recitation of the Quran, then we'll proceed. Over to you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة إن الله مع الصابرين. ولا تقولوا لمن يقتل في سبيل الله أموات بل أحياء ولكن لا تشعرون. ولنبلونكم بشيء من الخوف والجوع ونقص من الأموال والأنفس والثمرات وبشر الصابرين الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة قالوا إنا لله الذين إذا أصابتهم مصيبة أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون. صدق الله العظيم.
صدق الله العظيم. That was Sheikh Farah Mustawa, the Imam of Hagia Sophia Mosque in Istanbul, of Bosnian origin. Let me quickly run through today's program. We have to pack in a lot before the evening prayers, Salat al-Isha, which is at 7:30. So in terms of the format of the program, we will have our first speaker, who will be Peter O'Born. Thereafter, we'll have a video about the missing people from the Srebrenica genocide who were buried in July this year, a short video clip. Then we'll have Zara Muhammad from the Muslim Council of Britain, who will send us a video recorded message. And then we'll have the keynote by our ambassador, our main guest of this evening. And following that, we'll have a few minutes for discussion. Once again, welcome to the East London Mosque and London Muslim Centre to this evening's roundtable. This is supported by the Muslim Council of Britain, and the event is also part of the Islamophobia Awareness Month. So every year in November, we have a number of events and activities taking place throughout the country to raise awareness about Islamophobia and how we can deal with this problem. This event is also being live streamed on the East London Mosque Facebook and YouTube, also on Al Jazeera Mubashir, Al Jazeera TV, and you'll be happy to know many people are also viewing in from their homes, from different parts of the country as well as abroad. And I'm really touched that some of the guests here have come from Oxford, Birmingham, and other places, just to show their commitment and the interest to know more about what is happening. So I really thank you for coming and everyone else here. My name is Abdullah Faliq, and I'm one of the trustees of the East London Mosque. I've been leading on the Bosnia track, or the Bosnia work, for the last probably 2 decades on charity, awareness, campaign, and lobbying. And alhamdulillah, the East London Mosque, with partner organizations, has done considerably well in the last many years to raise awareness. So we are grateful that the ambassador is able to come and join us today for the first time visiting the mosque. So we'll learn more about the ambassador a bit later on. We'll hear from him. So without further ado, because of timing, I'll ask Peter O'Born now to make his presentation. Peter O'Born, most of you know, he's an award-winning journalist and writer. He was a columnist for the Middle East. He still is a columnist for the Middle East Eye and Open Democracy. He is a former political commentator of The Spectator, The Daily Telegraph, and The Daily Mail. He is the author of Triumph of the Political Class, The Rise of Political Lying, and a number of other books that are in the pipeline. Peter, most of you know, is very active and campaigning on various fronts, including Bosnia. So it's really our honor, and we really appreciate him giving the time us today to be here with us to share a few words. Peter O'Born.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to speak on this actually very somber event. The moment you asked me, I was determined to come because so much is at stake. Thanks to the Srebrenica Trust, I had the privilege and also the great sadness to go to Bosnia a few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and also to go to Srebrenica. Just going was a real, an extraordinary education. And that's just to go to somewhere where these terrible events had taken place while the world was inert. And to meet, to meet somebody who comes up to you, an elderly lady, and says, I say, I'm Peter O'Born. And she says, well, I was a I was a mother and I was a wife. It's very heavy to hear those words and to go to the scene where this enormous crime occurred. And then you go on talking to these heroic people who've lived through so much, and to hear that these ladies who've suffered beyond imagination, they walk in the streets of the local town, and they see the people who perpetrated these atrocities working as local policemen or councillors. And then if you dig a little bit further, you realize that you learn it seems absolutely incredible that the local mayor denies the genocide. We were with on this trip a very, very impressive lady from the Holocaust Trust. And she was talking about Germany and how you go back to Germany. The Germans have coped enormously well. They understand, they have fully acknowledged what happened and how terrible it was, and they have gone to every length imaginable to say sorry and to make sure and to acknowledge the full truth of it. And if the people who committed that atrocity are not admitting it, and the war criminals who committed it, that so many murders are still walking along in the local streets, and the local schools are teaching that the genocide didn't take place, that means it can happen again. It means it's quite likely to happen again. And as you drove through the countryside and saw the planted churches and heard about the meddling from Russians on behalf of the Serbs, you could see how readily it would happen again. And of course, now we have the recent developments where the Serbian leader is talking about sort of setting up a separate army and a separate legal system, and that of course would mean it is unthinkable what would happen if they had a separate army. You would be going back to that tragedy, which is only 25 years ago. So there's a blindness across much of the world to this, and the more we must now talk about it. So far, the instincts of the great Western institutions, which are all in retreat at the moment, is simply to compromise, to be bullied and to be threatened, just in order to keep harmony and keep the peace. But the matter, I've come here, the matter is so serious that as a working journalist, I've come here to learn and to understand more, Your Excellency, about how we need to act and what we now need, and the warnings we now need to give, and how Europe, NATO, the United States, Russia, and all the everybody relevant can make sure that we don't retreat to the barbarism which is such a recent memory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, for your opening words. I'm sure we'll have some time to discuss a bit later on when we have all the speeches. Our next presentation is by Zara Mohammed. Zara Mohammed is the Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain. She is the first female to occupy this position in the history of the organization. By profession, she is a management and strategy consultant. And because she lives outside London in Glasgow, she's unable to join us today physically. So she's recorded a special message for us via video. So this will be played to you right now.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation to speak this evening at such an important and pertinent topic, the Bosnian state and the Muslim population under attack again. I'd like to express my sincere apologies for not being able to join you in person this evening, but also my deepest gratitude for being able to share some reflections on behalf of the Muslim Council Britain. I'd also like to pay tribute to my esteemed colleagues and guests on the panel here today, His Excellency Vanja Filipovic and Peter Auburn. I do hope we'll be able to meet in person, and I'm sure your reflections and insights tonight are going to be really, really powerful for our audience and guests to listen to. For me, I think the question that is really pertinent is, why should we care? Why is this important? And for some people, this answer may be very obvious and very, very clear, but others, it may just be another conversation in a newsreel, you know, another breaking story or a story on the side, because there's so many other things going on. It's so easy for us to forget or to not listen or to pay heed to these important things that are happening around us in the context of Islamophobia, the global phenomenon of Islamophobia. And when we're talking about Bosnians and we're talking about the plight of Muslims, particularly in Bosnia, it's not happening within a vacuum. We see this with the Uyghurs in China, the Muslims in Rohingya, the Rohingya Muslims, but we see it all over. And even here within our context, this month is Islamophobia Awareness Month, and there has been hundreds of events, I myself have participated in quite a few now, in which we are now recognizing just how the scale, how large, how intense, how incredible that the nature of this problem is, how systemic, and I should say incredible in a negative way, not in a positive way. But my point being is that this is absolutely pertinent to all of us, because what is happening in the world is not happening devoid of our own reality. It is happening as a consequence and as completely aligned to what is happening here and around us. And so what I quickly wanted to share with you, I guess, was three really simple messages. And the first is the British Muslim community experience of Islamophobia right now. And what we are seeing is not just the physical and verbal side of this, but also the systemic institutional nature of that. And we just notably saw that with the recent cricket. But in people saying, and our political leaders and elites, institutional racism doesn't exist, Islamophobia doesn't exist, these are not real. You know, the dehumanization and securitization of Muslim populations, you know, something happens in the news, we see a spike in hate crime. The government's own statistics have said that 45% of all hate crime that is happening here in the UK is targeting British Muslims, right? So what does that all mean? And in the conversations that I've had, you know, I've been speaking to the big corporates, to legal boards, to institutions, universities, to schools, and they're all saying, Zara, this is a real issue. What can we do? How can we help? You know, what can we do to better support our Muslim communities, staff, colleagues? And I say that message number one, that Islamophobia is not just a Muslim problem, it is a societal evil that requires all of us to challenge it. You know, we cannot have active bystanders in this conversation. And just as we reflect on the situation in Bosnia, we cannot be active bystanders, you know, and people say, well, this trouble's going on all over the world. How are we supposed to tackle all of it? How are we supposed to be involved in all of those conversations? I don't think that's what we're saying, but what we're saying is we cannot leave these voices to be unheard. We have to continue to amplify when there is injustice, to call it out and to call for that justice, and to say that this is not a reflective of a world that we want to see, a society that we want to be part of. And I think the second point that I'd really make here is that we need action. And whilst the MCB here has been advocating very strongly for a definition of Islamophobia, but also a wider agenda on action and strategic-led approach across sector, we've also been looking at local communities, you know, providing hopefully a toolkit later on around what mosques can do to tackle Islamophobia. And some of the conversations that I've had is mosques saying, we're really worried because as soon as something happens in the news, we have to increase our security, a hate crime spikes up locally, and we have to cancel our classes. Over 500 young people coming at the weekend. I'm telling you real stories that have just happened recently, so this isn't just made up. So the reality is there, and I think a partnership-led approach is important. A strategic a strategy that is really based on action is integral. And then finally, coming back to what we're discussing tonight and why this matters to all of us, is that history repeats itself. And what we've already seen in Bosnia in the war, and myself having visited Srebrenica, the memorial, spoken to the victims, the survivors, the widows, it's heart-wrenching, but you can still feel the tension of that place. Their stories cannot be forgotten. I remember leaving Bosnia thinking, what is my responsibility coming here? And that is to make sure that these stories have not been forgotten, and these lessons also are not left just behind, just there. We have to take that forward. So I know that there's plenty of discussion tonight on what is the situation, with someone in such a powerful political position espousing so much division and polarization. What does it mean? What can we do? But most importantly, I think for all of us is we cannot forget what is happening. We cannot close our eyes to it. And on behalf of the MCB, we our full solidarity in that regard. So I do pray that the rest of this evening will be fruitful and beneficial to everybody. Our prayers and thoughts and du'as to everybody in Bosnia that is going through some of this very challenging time. And our prayers for peace, for peace ultimately. But I do hope to speak with you all again in person, and for the conversation to be one that is hopefully better next time we do so. And I thank everybody for this evening. My thanks also to East London Mosque for the invitation. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. That was Zara Muhammad, Secretary General of the Muslim Council of Britain, focusing on the issue of Islamophobia and it led to hatred, massacre, and eventually genocide in Bosnia. And tonight we have in front of us a number of guests from the Uyghur and the Rohingya community who are experiencing the very same thing now. They're going through the same trajectory, and so they can relate to what happened to the Srebrenica and genocide in Srebrenica and other places. So we'll talk more in the discussion a bit later on. The MCB has also been a long-term partner of the East London Mosque on the Bosnia work that we've been doing. So thank you, Zara Muhammad, for taking the time to send us that video message. Our next short video, then we'll have our keynote speech. It's a short video from July this year during the Srebrenica genocide commemoration, where 19 newly identified victims of the Srebrenica genocide bodies were buried in July in Srebrenica. So this video is really intended to show you what really happened, and 26 years on, people are still struggling. They don't know who their loved ones are, where they've been buried. So this just give us a quick reminder as to what's happened, and so we'll see a quick video now on the genocide.
Hamzabegović, rođen 1939. Muhidin Mujo Mehmedović, rođen 1977. Fikret Ramiz Kiverić, rođen 1978. Ramiz Rizo Selimović, rođen 1951. Esnaf Zurijet Halilović, rođen 1976. Zilha Edhem Delic, Rajun Hiedu Desisrum Desit Urve.
Muammer Osman Mujic, rođen 1976.
Mehmet Mustafa Beganović, rođen 1947.
Hajro Ramo Alić, rođen 1944.
Yusuf Hajro Alić, rođen 1967.
Zaim Mujo Hasanović, rođen 1968.
Asim Hussein Nukić, rođen 1971.
Azmir Aziz Osmanović, rođen 1979.
Nazir Rashid Dautović, rođen 1969.
Ibrahim Suljo Avdagić, rođen 1950.
Hussein Ibrahim Kurbačić, rođen 1932.
Jusuf Adem Halilović, rođen 1948.
Salih Džanan Džananović, rođen 1955.
Meho Salih Karahodžić, rođen 1939.
Suzom teškom i uzdahom majke Srebrenice.
ولا تحسبن الذين قتلوا في سبيل الله أمواتا بل أحياء عند ربهم يرزقون فرحين بما آتاهم الله من فضله ويستبشرون بالذين لم يلحقوا بهم من خلفهم ألا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون.
So that was a short video capturing some of the scenes of the Srebrenica genocide commemoration in Srebrenica this year. And can you imagine 26 years on, those families found some members of their family body parts to bury after so many years, and this continues. And it brings in focus what could potentially happen again should another conflict arise in Bosnia. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you the chief guest of this evening, the Ambassador of Bosnia-Herzegovina, His Excellency Vanja Filofović, to deliver the keynote speech. The ambassador is a former Bosnian cabinet member of the Bosnia-Herzegovina presidency as a foreign policy advisor. He's also a former chief cabinet to the communication and transportation minister in Bosnia. He also has a background in security studies academically. So we're grateful that the ambassador is able to make time to visit us first time at the East London Mosque. He'll now address the main topic of the evening. Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Abdullah. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be able to speak to you, and I profoundly thank the East London Mosque and the London Muslim Center for organizing this event. And I thank you all for taking your time to hear us, to give you some information about what is happening in Bosnia and why we should all care. It's almost bizarre to even contemplate another war or another deep crisis in Bosnia. Only 26 years have passed since the end of the war. We are still finding graves throughout the country, finding missing persons. There are still 7,000 people missing, and people are working on the ground trying to find them so they can give them proper burials. Every year we mark genocide in Srebrenica in July. This year was no exception, even due to COVID. In this country, genocide is observed throughout in many cities, towns, communities, and we deeply appreciate it. It gives true honor to all the victims and the families and survivors. like I said, it feels almost unimaginable to be speaking on this topic to this audience. But those of us who lived through the 1990s have learned to recognize signs of a coming storm. The hate speech, the divisive speech has been on the rise for the past 15 years, but now the rhetoric has moved into political realm and into security realm. The hard-won peace in Bosnia is now under severe threat. The peace that was achieved in Dayton 26 years ago was a difficult peace. It was unjust peace, and it's unfinished peace. For Bosnian state, which was internationally recognized, became a UN member in 1992, it had to accept a new division based on war and ethnic cleansing of the country. The country was divided internally into two entities, one entity into further 10 cantons. It created an administrative nightmare, but it also created a political system that was meant to give everybody a chance to participate, not leave anybody out, but it gave a lot of opportunity for blockades and blackmails. Nevertheless, the system worked for 26 years because one of the key ingredients for state building, for maintaining of peace between the three communities, was the international presence, which was built into the Dayton Peace Agreement. The civilian implementation of the peace agreement fell to the Office of the High Representative, an international body that was set up for this purpose, with vast powers to interpret Dayton Peace Agreement, but also to remove public officials who were acting in anti-Dayton spirit, and also to enact legislation if the local parliaments and governments could not do that. And the system worked for about 15 years, for about 15, or let's say 10 years really. It worked really well because many state institutions were built that were not there. We developed own unified currency, state border police, unified taxation administration, all these things that make a state that's functioning. Moreover, the heavy international presence with a very slow but persistent tracking of war criminals and their processing at the Hague Tribunal for war crimes such as the one in Srebrenica and many other war crimes throughout the country, including at the Bosnian state laws, meant that the divisive and hate-filled rhetoric was clamped down. It was still present, but it was not the dominant public narrative. There was really a hope that over time communities could slowly heal. Victims will get some kind of justice, although real justice is never fully achievable in situations like this when you have so many war crimes committed on such an extensive level. And that state would finally be able to function and reform in such a way that Bosnia would one day become a normal, democratic, multi-ethnic European country. Over the years, Bosnian governments in which all ethnic groups and parties participated slowly but surely made progress in key areas, submitting application for EU membership, submitting application to NATO membership. Armed forces were unified, former three warring sides were put into one professional force that was able to go out and contribute to peace operations around the world. It's a huge achievement, and we are very proud of that. So for about 10 years, the process was going on well, but Dayton was not able to address the underlying issues that led to the war in the first place. And that was the territorial pretensions on the Bosnian state with the aim to divide it between their neighbors, and what's left in the middle, where the majority Bosniaks lived, and Bosnians who did not share the nationalist ideologies of segregated communities and so on, they would be left in there, surrounded, isolated, basically futureless. Now that scenario is back on in full force. Over the past 15 years, as the international level of commitment to Bosnia kind of waned away, with the geopolitical landscape changing, with the just generally lesser interests in the region, in Bosnia especially, the research and nationalist politics have been gaining force. To address some of those issues, the international community decided rather to not tackle the problems head on, but to try and find some kind of compromises. So it gave in to those nationalist demands which are aimed at taking those state institutions that were built, start taking them apart, and start removing international community as a sort of arbiter, taking them out of equation. At the same time, the level of hate speech, divisive speech, even level of violence, especially against the returnee communities, into Republika Srpska especially, were on the increase. Now, almost every summer we have incidents, during the commemoration week, where people, returnees, peoples of faith, religious leaders are targeted in incidents that are usually just dismissed by local police. So if we fast forward to this past July, what started this latest episode, which has really become a full-blown crisis, was the decision by the High Representative, Austrian diplomat named Inzko, to impose a law which banned and made illegal genocide, denial, and glorification of war criminals. Because what was happening prior to that was that politicians were actively encouraging and glorifying war criminals who were convicted by the Hague Tribunal and local tribunals for war crimes as some kind of national heroes. The issue became almost at the pinnacle when they named a student dormitory in one of the small towns in Republika Srpska after Radovan Karadzic, who, as you probably know, is serving life sentence for genocide and other charges here in UK prison after a very lengthy court process. So these hate-filled narratives were not only meant to for domestic political purposes, to garner political support among your own people, but they were sending message to others, especially those who were victims of those war criminals, that we don't want to have anything with you, we don't respect you, we don't recognize what was done to you, and they were trying to, in fact, incite a response. They wanted hate to be returned with hate. Because in such a divisive society, it is easy to carry out politics of division, which spills into political and eventually territorial ground. So in July, Inzko passed the ban on glorifying war criminals and denying Srebrenica and other genocides. And the Republika Srpska leadership and opposition parties jointly, they said they will not participate in the functioning of the state institutions, effectively stopping government from carrying out its normal duties. On top of that, a month or two later, they started announcing series of moves where they would withdraw agreement unilaterally from participating at all in the state institutions, effectively trying to dismantle them or at least to ban them from their operation on the entity of Republika Srpska, which is about 49% of the Bosnian territory. They've announced that they would withdraw soldiers from the joint armed forces and create a parallel force in Republika Srpska, and do the same with security intelligence agency and other administrations. To show that this is not an empty threat or just a level of rhetoric that we are sort of used to in the past 15 years to dealing with, they've started preparing a legal framework for that and started proposing laws at the level of the entity Republika Srpska to enable such moves. And the first sessions of the National Assembly will take place either on the 8th or 10th December, when they will formally take activities to dismantle Bosnian armed forces and other institutions. Now, you might wonder why aren't Bosnians, in Sarajevo and other places doing anything about it? Politically, it is very hard in the system that was set up in Dayton to reach any kind of consensus and agreement and to effectively put a stop to this. If you rely on other institutions, they're also under, like the police, prosecutors, courts, they're still under very heavy political influence. So the only line of defense that can prevent from situation unraveling and leading to an open conflict, because imagine a scenario where the RS paramilitary or military forces are trying to evict regular Bosnian armed forces from barracks somewhere in Republika Srpska. It's a scenario that does not lead to anything good. And an incident like that could spark a much larger fire that could potentially spread beyond the borders of Bosnia-Herzegovina into the whole region. So what we're trying to do here is really to warn our friends in the international community that the situation here now is not the normal political life of Bosnia with high-intensity rhetoric, but this is a security issue. And in absence of convincing deterrent, there is nothing to stop RS leadership, especially with their international sponsors from Russia and elsewhere, to carry out their plans. Because this is part of their long-standing ideology. This is the opportunity for their wartime goals to be achieved and they will not get another chance, probably, unless they're stopped now. So we're trying to raise awareness, to tell people here, because international community still has a very large impact in Bosnia. It has presence, military and civilian. It has the tools to prevent another conflict from arising, conflict that could lead into anything, really. UK is part of that international community. UK is very much present. It works with the Office of the High Representatives. It works with NATO in Sarajevo. It works through UN, and there are many other bilateral mechanisms to exert pressure. So what is lacking so far in the international response is the will to stop compromising and talking about things that will leave Bosnia an empty shell and eventually into its collapse. A collapse that will leave one particular ethnic group extremely vulnerable, isolated, and completely cut off. So in conclusion, and I apologize for a lengthy talk, DPA, the Dayton Peace Agreement, is unraveling at an accelerating pace. And the red lines have long been crossed. There are so many compromises that were reached before, and none of them appeased those who do not want Bosnia to succeed. Compromises only lead to more demands and to more crises, which all have the same negative outcome. Our message is that it's time to put stop to that. UK, as one of our strongest allies and friends, can set important international benchmarks in response to this sort of political aggression that is taking place. And it's communities like this and many others that were pivotal in 1990s to raise awareness and to get the government to act that can play an important part in that process. After everything we have endured in the 1990s, Bosnia-Herzegovina, a society with centuries of shared coexistence between ethnic groups and religions, if it is allowed to disappear in a smoke of division and hatred that is currently on the rise, one might ask what future holds for any multi-ethnic society? What future holds for Europe's Muslims, Jews, or other non-Christians? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for that very broad presentation covering a range of issues and giving us a background to the potential threat in Bosnia. We now have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions or discussion. For our Muslim friends who want to pray, the prayer will be at 7:30, but the call to prayer, the adhan, will not be heard here, but it'll go in the next couple of minutes. But we will hope to finish before prayers. So we have about 10 to 15 minutes. Feel free to raise your hands, and a roaming mic will come to you. Please keep your questions as brief as possible to allow maximum participation. So any quick questions, comments from anyone? Both the Ambassador and Peter can answer also. So we have Dr. Abdul Karim Khalil in the front. Can we have a mic in the front, please? Just in the front there.
Yeah, thank you both for your presentations. Just really very basic question. Are the Bosnians now in a better position to defend themselves in case things go out of control?
Should we take 2-3 questions at a time, or you want to address one? Is there another quick question from anyone? Okay, yeah, just third row.
Assalamu alaikum.
If you can introduce yourself also.
Okay, my name is Hassan Olawale. I'm a broadcast journalist, and I also cover for some local stations here. Having a good understanding of a problem will help in finding a solution to it. And this question is for both our guests on the table. Could you say this is more of an ethnic issue or religious, or both?
Thank you. One third question. Aziz in the front. Aziz Isa from the Uyghur community. Second row.
Thank you. Yes, I myself Uyghur, as Dr. Abdullah said. We are a very small community here in the UK. And yes, Uyghurs are one of the worst genocide Uyghur people are facing at the moment. Scale is very large. We are talking about millions of people. So I wonder, Bosnia as a state, as an independent state, and China's lots of investment to the Balkan states and Eastern Europe as well. Even we have been so far, China supporting Palestinian Authority, 20 million something per year, and Palestinian Authority is, yes, they are also suffering for many years from Israel attack, right? And so, I mean, what's your experience? Now, many like new states like Palestine or Bosnia, Muslim majority states, and they are also receiving support from China. So in this situation, what's the Bosnian state's official stance on the against Chinese Uyghur genocide? Did you have any response towards this?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So 3 questions, Peter, Ambassador. First is about, is the Bosnian military or the overall structure ready for a conflict? Second question is about, is the conflict more about religion or ethnic issues? And the third about the role of China. So who wants to go first?
The first question was what?
The role of China and Bosnia.
On the first question, Bosnians have learned painful lessons from 1990s and are, I think, generally speaking, better prepared. But there is any scenario that leads to war or violence is a losing scenario. What we're trying to build is a normal, democratic, multi-ethnic society, and that's the safest house for all 3 peoples and everybody else who don't identify as Bosniaks, Serbs or Croats. Any type of conflict that would arise would severely damage or maybe even make it impossible for that society to exist in the future and will be lost for everyone, but especially, I think, for Bosnians and Bosniaks at the center. So it's not a question of preparedness, it's a question of what then. So key message is to prevent at all costs further deterioration of the situation, because it does not lead into anything positive or good. There will be losses for everybody under that scenario.
I just couldn't agree more with you, Anja. The idea of going into war, if you remember what happened in the 1990s, is beyond the computation, really. To answer the third question, I mean, I do think that, and I don't know the answer, I came here to learn, and I've learned a great deal from His Excellency, not to really to talk about things I don't properly understand, but there is an interesting, it is an interesting thing, and it's a very troubling and evil thing, and it is something which isn't properly recognized at all in the West, where very often Islam is projected as a sort of aggressive religion. That again and again across the world we find minority Muslim groups facing genocide or ethnic cleansing. You know, if you just look at the last 25 years, you've had the genocide of the Rohingya just a few years ago, where the British government was nowhere. They were pretty well defending the Myanmar government, and then of course Srebrenica, where and then we have the case now with the Uyghurs. And there's a lot of other cases around the world where Mindanao in the southern Philippines. We have a lot of other cases where very, very isolated communities or defenseless communities are suffering. I make a cynical point now, that I think that, and I say this as a journalist, that it was, when I went to Srebrenica a few years ago and came back, I couldn't get, I wrote about it for Middle East Eye, but I wanted to write about it in the Daily Mail, actually. But it was very hard to get a hook. And now you've got evil Mr. Putin to sell to the British newspapers that you can add his name into this. And likewise, if China, when 5 years ago China was the friend of the West, and George Osborne, the British Chancellor, would go there and say what wonderful things were happening in Xinjiang province. Now that we've now become an enemy of China, apparently, it makes it much easier for journalists to get the message across And you might think it's because we're not too concerned about actually what's happening in Riga, which of course we are, but you think there's something, it folds into a much larger geostrategic story. I don't know if that helps answer your question or not.
Okay, thank you, Peter, and thank you, Ambassador. Any more questions or comments? In the middle and the row behind. The gentleman with the green top first, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
If you could stand up, it would be good for our cameras, if you don't mind. I've just been told.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Murshid Siddiq, and thank you so much for your nice presentation. One thing has surprised me, a bit shocked me, that after 26 years is happening, but the fact that with these 26 years is the people who are probably on the front line, they were young kids when this happened, so they are the new generations. So how come these, the generations that were kids at that time, instead of taking the lessons, they can still be molded? So my question is, either in the treaty or in the Bosnian government system, in their compulsory primary and secondary education system, do you have anything that build the ethnicity cohesion or cultural cohesion? Has this been addressed in the educational level?
Okay.
And that could be could protect the next generations coming up.
Thank you. And the person behind, the row behind. Yep.
Firstly, thank you for the esteemed guests, both physically and remotely dialing in. My question is that what's happening in Bosnia and continues to happen in Bosnia is due to a number of reasons, as you mentioned: nationalism, ideology, territory, and so on. With that in mind, do you really believe there's a actual process of peaceful coalition with all the different groups? And if so, what's the one big change that needs to happen to really drive that?
Thank you. And another question, maybe right in the front, just here in the corner. Sorry, making you run around. It's in the corner. Imam Mawluddin, also from Bosnia, a local imam and a teacher.
Thank you all for coming today and being here with us. As the ambassador mentioned, those of us who lived in 1990s can recognize the storm, the signs of storm coming. I really appreciate that statement. What I would like to ask is, how concerning is it that we have two major political parties led by Dodik and Čović are asking and requesting in the parliament today for a law introduced by High Representative Inzko to be abolished, a law that calls for a ban of genocide denials and glorification of war criminals. So this is what we're dealing with. How concerning is this for the Bosnian state?
Thank you. We'll take one more question because prayer is in literally 4 or 5 minutes. So just behind, fourth row and at the back. Yes. So third row first.
Hi, my name is Muaz Međedović. Just in case, as a, if it does happen that on the next session of Parliament of Republika Srpska, if they do agree to carry on with what they've been talking about, withdrawing from all those institutions and abolishing Bosnian army, and what is the contingency plan? What is the option left to do? Is it going to be just acceptable what it is? I mean, there is no way of any armed conflict bringing any resolution to it. So, is there any instrument in place? Have any think tank group been thinking about that?
Okay. Thank you. I think we've got the question. I'm mindful that all the people asking questions are men. Any women want to ask any questions? You're allowed to. Anyone? If not, we have 2 more hands at the back and one in the third row here. Then we'll round up.
Hello, my name is Shahid, and I've just got a question that whether army training is being made compulsory or not by the Bosnians, so that they can face the challenges that are coming over a period of time. And now that 25 years have passed, so what has been done to elevate?
Thank you. I'm going to rush you because we literally got 3 minutes before prayers. So let me just summarize the questions to our two guest speakers. First question was about young generation. What are they being taught? Are they being taught the history that transpired? Second question was about peace with the various groups. Is that possible? Third question is about the genocide denial being banned, or it's been put forward to ban any claims of genocide. Fourth is what plans do you have? Backup, contingency. And the final is the army, whether it's compulsory or not. So feel free to answer all of them together in a short space of time as much as possible. Thank you.
All right. Starting with the army, no, it's a professionalized army at 10,000 soldiers. It's part of a defense reform package that was introduced by international community and that we've been working on for quite some time. So it's a professional army, unified army, and a Ministry of Defense. Now, because of its success, it is now at the center of the demands by RS leadership to be dismantled or at least reduced by half to 5,000. So that's one of the demands. On the question of contingency planning, like I said, there are laws in Bosnia that address these issues. But the question is there a will and independence of the judiciary to tackle them in the right way? And if not, then it's the international community's really the last sort of line of defense to use the bond powers of the High Representative, the executive powers, and to use in case they need to for peacekeeping troops that are there on the UN mandate to keep peace, what they call safe and secure environment. Other than that, I don't know if other contingency plans you're referring to, I have no knowledge of that. On the question of what happened today in the House of Peoples, in the upper house of the Bosnian parliament, two clubs, the Club of Peoples, the Serb and Croat club, demanded that the law banning genocide glorification be lifted. So it was the first time that the national parties from two camps actually worked together to lift this. So which it was inconceivable almost before, but now it's out in the open and just shows the severity of the situation, because it clearly shows level of cooperation between two nationalist camps at the detriment.
We will finish in 1 minute. That's the call to prayer. So we'll just let the two guests just finish in 30 seconds each, and we'll close the meeting. So, yeah, that's right. So, Ambassador, just 10, 20 seconds.
Okay, in the last question on education. Education is unfortunately a divided issue. So there are literally 3 histories being taught in schools, and 3 geographies, and 3 everything else. So there's, schools were not used to teach new generations, to integrate them. If anything, there are still over 50 schools in Bosnia, what they call 2 schools under single roof. They're literally dividing kids along ethnic lines. That's still going on, that type of segregation even today.
Okay. Peter, just very quickly.
Very quickly, I would just say that I mean, it was incredible that in Europe, after 1945, a genocide could take place. And the answer, I think, His Excellency would endorse, is we must show strength in Europe to avoid a repeat of the horror. And if we don't, I really think that what's the point of us? And so we have to show a strength which we've not yet shown. We can't keep on compromising and giving in. And we've got to indicate that if genocide denialists are on the warpath, we are 100% against that, particularly because after the horrors of 1996, 5, and 6, and the Holocaust in World War II.
Thank you very much. And on that note, we'll conclude this evening's program. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Ambassador, for gracing us with your presence, and Peter. What we should do now is really try and work, lobby our local MPs, raise awareness, and follow our recordings on Facebook and YouTube, and share this recording to everyone else. Some of you have been invited to a second part of the program. This will be taking place in the first floor in a few minutes' time, so please find your way upstairs. For those of you joining here to pray, prayer just started now. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Osmijeh sebi na današnji dan. Neka duša